Hi everybody, my name is Lauren and welcome to the Omnivorous Bookworm. Today I wanted to make a video about the book The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. So this is basically a classic. It was written in 1993 and it takes place between the years 2024 and 2027. So it's futuristic, dystopian. There's not a ton of sci-fi elements as far as technological sci-fi elements, but there are other aspects that would put it in the sci-fi category as well as being in the future. So I found this book on Kindle Unlimited and I really went into it. I just saw it was by Octavia Butler and I'd read a couple other things by her at university, so I was really excited and I kind of dumped things off my list to put put it on there. And it's part of a duology. It's the first one. So the next one is the Parable of the Tablets. And so I pretty much went into it just knowing that it was dystopian. I really didn't know much else about it. I know that it has been talked about a lot. So I've tried not to watch other people's opinions, just to, like, this is my honest opinion, good, bad, or otherwise. Like, this is what I thought about the book. So we follow a young girl or young woman. Her name is Lauren Olamina, and she lives with her family. And there's 11 families that live on this cul-de-sac in a suburb of LA. And basically, because of climate change and economic collapse, the world has just devolved, and drugs and all this stuff. So they have this wall around their community. Her father is a Baptist minister, and he also works at a university where he has a job that actually pays money, which is unusual. Money is very difficult to find in this world. She's being raised by her stepmom, and I believe she has 3 or 4 younger brothers. We don't follow all of the brothers that much. And so they're living on this cul-de-sac surrounded by this wall, but they're very isolated in their area. The only time that we see her leaving in the story when she lives with her family is to go and do target practice. Her stepmother has the school, so there's no school system set up. The police or firefighters, any type of those utilities, if you need them, you have to pay a really high fee. They're basically useless. They're just as bad as the gangs around them. So it's a pretty bleak world. And then while she's living in this with her, but she still has her friends, she has a boyfriend, she has her family, she has these close ties. She's also developing this sort of philosophy that she calls Earthseed. She's decided that she doesn't really agree with what her father has been teaching as a Baptist minister, so she creates this philosophy that she says that she feels that she's discovered. It's not very spiritual, it's more sort of philosophical. And the basic premise is that God is change, and she writes some kind of little poems or little parts of it to illustrate some of her theological beliefs. The other interesting thing about the main character is that she has a condition because her mother was using this drug when she was pregnant with her. She has this condition called hyperempathy, and she describes it as a neurological condition, and that when she looks at someone, if they're in pain or they're feeling some type of, I believe it's only physical pain, that she physically feels that. So if someone gets punched in the face, she would feel as though she were punched in the face, but she has to be looking at the person. And when she was younger, she actually would physically bleed. Like if she saw someone bleeding, or she thought she saw someone bleeding, her skin would actually bleed. So she has this hyper empathy syndrome as well, which is pretty interesting. So the book itself deals with so many different themes. So we have the theme of climate change, which is and the environment, and how you know, if you take certain things away from the environment, like, you know, paint, if water becomes very expensive, all these types of ideas, like, and a lot of sci-fi novels will deal with this, but like the sort of collapse of society, the societal contract, what happens if that breaks, how close to animals will people become, all these types of themes we see present. We also see she talks about slavery a lot, different types of slavery. So we'll see men purchasing women for their enjoyment, to be wives. So we start to see sort of polygamy coming back, because these women have no one else to, they have nowhere else to go. There's not easy access to contraception, so women are having babies, whether they would like to or not. We see people working for these really large companies and getting paid in scrip, which we used to see, you know, back in the olden days with coal mining companies and those types of horrible companies where they would, you know, keep their employees in these dangerous, horrible jobs, and then they're actually not really paying them. Or we also see slavery with rich families where they're actually just paying people with room and board and basically enslaving them, and people are willing to put up with it because they're so poor and the outside is so dangerous. We also see the types, all those types of themes with, you know, companies taking over land, these huge companies buying stuff up, and drugs. Obviously, we see, it's very interesting because, you know, as everybody will say, you know, a novel that's, even though it's written in the future, it's really, it very much emphasizes the concerns, the anxieties that people had in the early 90s, and this would have been, I guess this would have been right around the time of the crack epidemic and all those types of things. So you can definitely see the way that drugs and drug users are portrayed is very extreme. Like those of us who were in school in the 90s, you know, are familiar with, like, it was sort of this idea, or you were raised with this idea, or it was sort of in the zeitgeist that, like, well, if you start smoking a cigarette, by next year you're going to be doing heroin and you're just going to be crazy. So you definitely see that there's a drug that the people are using called pyro that makes them want to start fires. And so they're in Southern California with this drought and they're starting all these fires. Yeah, so it's just very, very interesting to see all those types of things. I don't want to say I enjoyed this book because it's not really like a book that you enjoy. It's a very hard book. It's a very difficult book to read sometimes as far as content warnings. I mean, it has everything. Like any horrible thing that you can imagine one person doing to another is in this book. Like, and just when you think like, oh, I've read it all, like there was a scene that I saw with these kids and they're doing, I'm like, oh, whoa, no, I didn't expect that. Like, it's intense. It's really an intense read. It's very well written. I feel like for the most part, Octavia Butler does a pretty good job of not overly describing, not overly dwelling on these horrible things, although there are times that she does. So it's obviously a choice. It's not just there to be shocking, or, you know, it's there to explain this world and how things are happening in it. So I didn't feel like it was, I mean, it is over the top, but I felt like there was a reason why she was doing it, so I was okay with it personally. But just to let you know, like, everything is in this book. Anything horrible is in this book. It's like, whoa. So as far as like some of the things that I feel like didn't work as well, I would say this is kind of a nitpicky thing, so I realize that, but I think the structure, the way that she has it set up, so it's sort of set up like a journal. Well, it's set up like a journal that our main character is writing, and then she'll put some of her earth seed philosophy into it. I'm not sure. It just, that always kind of irritates me when people write things as though it's a journal, but then they're putting all this dialogue and all this description, and nobody writes a journal like that. Although I'm glad she did it because it's a more interesting book, and a lot of the time in the book, the character wouldn't be having time to write all of this down, or she doesn't have all this stuff. But anyway, that's just a nitpicky thing. I just decided to take it as a book that's written in first person that has dates next to some of the entries, so it didn't bother me that much. Another, I would say, the sort of the thing that has the biggest holes in it for me is some of the world building. So we don't really, I personally didn't quite understand why society had fallen apart to the level that it had. Like, the way that Octavia Butler has this world set up, like, the states are basically, their borders are militarized. We have, the police are not there. We have people are just wandering. You can't even walk out in the street. Like, people are setting fires. It's just complete chaos. And I was a little bit confused as to why it had broken down so much. I mean, I get the climate change, but I just couldn't quite, I didn't feel like there was enough information to really understand exactly why it had gotten so bad, like the economic collapse. I don't know, that just seemed a little bit strange to me. It also seemed a little bit strange that all these people, like, don't have, there's so many people who don't have jobs that don't make money. There's so many people who are illiterate because there's no schools, but yet her dad has a job at a university. I was a little bit confused as to why the university was still intact, but we don't have police. We don't, so that didn't quite, like, I couldn't quite understand exactly why that was happening as much. What was the other thing? Oh, the other thing that was a little bit odd, I felt like, it's kind of funny because you can definitely see it's written in the early 90s, because she mentions, she's obviously trying to imagine what life would be like, and she talks about her dad sometimes going into work and sometimes telecommuting. She doesn't exactly explain how that works, but one of the interesting things is that her dad has a computer. She mentions the computer. There's really no mention of the internet or anything like that. And they still have, like, the physical lines, like the physical phone lines. Everything has, like, the physical lines, which is fine, and it's kind of interesting. That, these have, like, lines in the, like, there's nothing underground or anything like that. But I just kept thinking, like, if all these people are wandering around the streets and it's so unsafe and we can't have police, like, all of this stuff, how are these lines still standing? Like, wouldn't the people have torn those down? Like, wouldn't that be the first thing they'd, like, cut down? And I don't know, it was just kind of interesting to me that we still have all this infrastructure, um, even though, like, everything else basically has broken down. There's no cars. There's, everything is super expensive, but we still have all this infrastructure and people haven't torn it down yet. I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting, but I feel like in this book in particular, it's really not so much a world building book. It's more a book, like, discussing different themes. I did find the Earth Seed part of it very interesting. This is number 1 in a duology. The next one is the Parable of the Tablets. So my guess is, I don't know because I haven't read it, the second book is going to go even more into her sort of philosophy and everything. I found her philosophy really interesting. It has a lot of interesting ideas about, like, if God is change, like, what does that mean? And I don't know, I found all of those types of themes really interesting. Sometimes I had a hard time sort of believing that, she didn't seem really interested. Like, obviously, she didn't believe her father's beliefs. She didn't believe, she wasn't spiritual at all. And so it seemed a little strange. And it didn't seem like she ever really had been. It was just sort of like in the background for her. That she would be, it seemed strange that she would be so focused on this new philosophy. I don't know. That was just me personally. Sometimes I had a hard time sort of, she didn't seem to want to talk about it sometimes, or I don't know, it didn't strike me as somebody who, like, really wanted to spread this philosophy. that she talks about that she wants to do. But I was fine with that too, because I just went along with it. I'm like, okay, we're talking about these themes. This is more of a theme and a character-based book. I would definitely say it's not so much a world-building book. It's not heavy, like I said, on the sci-fi technology aspect of it. All of those things. I will say, like, the character building that Octavia Butler managed to do in this book is amazing. Like, for the cast of characters that she has, um, she does a really great job in just a few sentences of, you really get a mental picture, you really get an emotional picture of who these people are. Like, it's amazing. She did a really, really great job. And in this type of a book, that's so important, because we have to care about these people that are having all these horrible experiences. So even though it's told in first person, you personally, I really felt like I could relate to all of these characters. I felt like I understood them. I understood what they were doing. You get this sense of, like, brooding that's happening. She does a really, really, really great job of that part of it. She also, I really like how she works in the hyper empathy. I think she does a good job with that. Although I was a little bit confused as to, at first she says it's when she sees someone that she thinks is sick, or is injured, that she feels it. But then, like, later on in the book, she'll talk about that she sees someone injured and she's like, well, it must not be causing them pain because I didn't feel any pain. So I'm like, well, is it just your perception, or are you really feeling somebody else's pain? I was a little bit confused about how the hyper empathy syndrome worked. But what I really liked about how Octavia Butler handled it, and I feel like a lot of authors don't handle conditions or disabilities really well, is that most of the time the character is fine, like, it's not something that affects her. But then when it affects her, she talks about how she has to hide it. She has to learn how to not show that she's feeling someone else's pain, because obviously in this world that is a liability. And she talks about, like, how much mental effort she's taking to hide the fact that she has this condition. And then because she's spending all this mental effort and all this time to hide it, when she does tell someone, hey, I have this condition, like, just to let you know, they don't believe her. And they'll say, yeah, but you saw that person, get whatever, and you were fine. So now, because she spent so much time trying to hide her condition, now people don't always believe that she has it, or that it's affecting her as much as it does, which I feel like anybody who has a disability or any type of condition, I mean, anybody can relate to this, that you spend so much time trying to fit into society, and then when you tell somebody, they're like, oh, they're just so convinced that you would be lying about it or something. Like, I know for me personally, like, as a kid, like, as an adult now, it's more obvious that I'm visually impaired because my eye muscles have become weaker, but I see the same as I did when I was a kid. And, I would have teachers imply and say explicitly, like, oh, you're faking, you don't really have that. And that's a common thing that a lot of people with even, physical disabilities, things that are very measurable, will have people say, like, oh, you don't need a wheelchair because you can walk 5 steps. People are always ready to just assume that someone would lie about having, like, who wants to lie about having a condition, or like, as a kid, I would read with the book I would just sit with the book far away, even though I couldn't read it, because if I held the book close, like, I knew the kids would tease me, just stuff like that. Or if I would tell people, I'm like, oh yeah, I can't see color because I can't see any color. And they'd say, you can see color, you just said that the sky was blue. It's like, well, I know the sky is blue, it doesn't mean I can see the sky is blue. Anyway, I really liked how she covered that part of having a disability. I know people who are on the spectrum have, people just don't understand things, and they don't appreciate how hard everybody's working to, like, fit in, and then they think that you would lie about it. So anyway, I really enjoyed that part, and I think she handled it really, really, really well. Like I said, the characterization, the writing, all of that is just really well done. At first, I was thinking to give this book 4 stars, and then when I got to the end, I was like, oh my gosh, this ending is so good. So I pushed it up to 4.5. I'm not going to get into any spoilers, but the ending is so well done. I feel like it fits everything. I was crying at the end. It's just, you have this like long, and then you just get this release, and I just think she handled the ending perfectly. Thematically, she did it perfectly. Character-wise, plot-wise, everything fit. I feel like with a series, like, this is how you end a book. Like, we have an ending, but then I can see where the story might continue on. I thought she did a really good job. One of the other small issues I had, well, maybe slightly large issue, was the pacing. I felt like the pacing was good up until about, I don't know, maybe the last 12 chapters, or maybe from maybe like the last 2/3, but like at the end is good, but like maybe this like chunk in the last third section, it did drag a little bit. It was a little bit like, okay, all right, but I think that could also be intentional, because we were feeling this with the character, so the pacing kind of matches that. But as the reader, it's not the most enjoyable thing to read. But like, I can understand from like a thematic concept and all that. Yeah, it works really well. But yeah, when you're reading it, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, please let me out. But all in all, like, I don't want to say, like I said, I didn't enjoy the book. It's not like a fun book to read. But I really appreciate the book. It is a weird thing where it's like, I want to read the next one. I want to read the next one. But then I'm like, do I want to subject myself to that again? But it was definitely worthwhile. I would definitely like kind of be prepared for what you're getting in for. But in some ways, I'm glad I wasn't prepared, because maybe I wouldn't have read it if I had known just how hard-hitting the book would have been. But it's definitely a classic. I mean, I really appreciate how she handled all of these issues, and I feel like it's definitely a book that if I could handle it, I might want to read it more than once, just because I think I would get more out of it. But at the same time, like, I don't know that I could do that to myself. So, um, it's on Kindle Unlimited now, I believe. So if it's something you would like to check out, it's definitely worthwhile. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.